the illusion of control and the peace of surrender. Have you ever noticed, the more we try to control everything, the less peace we seem to have? We plan, predict, overthink, protect. We say, if I can just get everything right, then I'll feel safe. But deep down we know, no matter how tight our grip, life slips through our fingers like sand. There's a strange paradox here. The harder we hold on, the more we suffer. But the moment we surrender, something softens. Not because everything becomes perfect, but because we stop fighting what is. Today we'll walk gently into this paradox. The Buddha offered a path not of control, but of clarity. Not of clinging, but of compassion. He taught that surrender isn't weakness, it's wisdom. And somewhere in this story, you may discover why letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means becoming free. Stay with me until the end, because there's a moment, a simple story about a cracked mirror that may change the way you see yourself forever. If this quiet path feels familiar, if something in you is tired of gripping, then come walk this journey with us. Subscribe to Lotus Light Teachings, not to follow a channel, but to return to yourself again and again. Now take a deep breath, and let's begin. There's something strangely exhausting about trying to hold everything together. It starts early. Maybe it's a child gripping tightly to their favorite toy, afraid someone might take it away. Or a teenager needing to say the perfect thing, do the perfect thing, be the perfect thing, just to be accepted. Maybe it's you, now, with a calendar full of meetings, a heart full of hopes, and a mind quietly calculating how to keep all the spinning plates from falling. We don't call it control. We call it responsibility. Planning, caring, trying hard. But somewhere beneath all of it, if we get quiet enough, we might notice something else. A fear that if we stop trying so hard, everything will fall apart. The Buddha understood this part of us deeply. He called it upadana, clinging, not just to people or objects, but to identity, outcomes, expectations, and even the illusion of permanence itself. And it's this clinging, not the world itself, that often becomes the very cause of our suffering. Let's take a moment and breathe with that. Imagine a hand gripping a rope. The tighter it holds, the deeper the burn in the skin. And yet, the mind whispers, if I let go, I'll lose everything. But what if letting go isn't loss, but liberation? What if we've been gripping a rope tied to nothing? Sometimes we're not really holding on to reality, we're holding on to stories. Old ones, painful ones. It has to be this way. They must love me back. I should have known better. I must never fail. Each belief like a thread. Together they form a net. And we live inside it, calling it protection, when it's quietly suffocating us. Control becomes our armor, but it also becomes our prison. And in the quiet stillness of a temple, or the deep silence between heartbeats, the Buddha's teachings whisper a truth that both frightens and frees us. All that arises will pass away. The weather changes. The people we love change. We change. And the more we try to force things to stay as they are, or to become what we think they should be, the more friction we create with life itself. That friction is anxiety. That friction is grief. That friction is exhaustion. So what does surrender actually mean? It's not about giving up. It's not about passivity or apathy. Surrender is the sacred act of stepping back, of loosening the grip, of no longer demanding the river flow the way we think it should, but learning instead to float with it. Have you ever stood beside a mountain stream? There's a power to its movement, relentless yet effortless. No stone resists the current and wins. And yet, over time, even the hardest rock is softened into smoothness. That's what surrender feels like. Not weakness, but strength through softness. And maybe the first step toward that surrender is noticing gently, without blame, what we've been trying to control. It might be someone's love, or our past, or the pace at which life is unfolding. But whatever it is, we can take a deep breath and name it. We can hold it in the palm of our heart, not to crush it or reject it, but to see it clearly, to ask softly, have I been trying to grip the wind? The truth is, control is an illusion, and yet, it's a very human one. Even the Buddha, before his enlightenment, lived through years of trying to force the path, through asceticism, deprivation, and extreme discipline. He, too, had to release the illusion that salvation could be controlled into being. It wasn't until he sat beneath the Bodhi tree, in stillness, not striving, that the truth finally came. That awakening doesn't come from force, but from clarity. Not from tightening, but from opening. And perhaps from realizing that we don't need to control the world to be free. We just need to let go of the illusion that we must. So let's begin this journey, not by gripping harder, but by loosening just a little, just enough to feel the breeze again. Have you ever watched a bird take flight? There's no hesitation.
No overthinking.
Just wings catching the invisible, trusting the sky to hold what the earth cannot. That's the kind of surrender the Buddha spoke of, not one born from defeat, but from seeing clearly. The problem isn't that we care too much. It's that we confuse caring with control. We think loving someone means making sure they never leave, never change, never hurt. We think success means planning every step so tightly that there's no room for life to surprise us. But in trying to prevent pain, we often end up prolonging it. There's a woman I once met at a meditation retreat. Her voice always had a trembling kindness in it, like a violin string plucked just once but still resonating. During a walking meditation, she gently shared a story with me about her son, whom she'd lost to addiction. I tried everything, she said, eyes fixed somewhere far away. Treatment, threats, love, logic. I thought if I just did the right things, said the right words, I could fix it. I didn't know. Some things aren't mine to fix. Then she paused, her steps falling in rhythm with her breath. But letting go, it didn't mean I stopped loving him. It meant I loved him without the illusion that I could save him. That was surrender, pure and heartbreaking, but also freeing. Letting go isn't the end of love. It's the beginning of a different kind, a freer kind, one that doesn't need to possess to be present, one that doesn't measure its worth by outcomes, one that says, I am here, I will walk beside you, but I no longer need to carry your path for you. The Buddha's wisdom on this is both clear and compassionate. He taught us to recognize the three marks of existence: impermanence, anicca, suffering, dukkha, and non-self, anatta. And it is from these three truths that the illusion of control begins to dissolve. Because how can we control what never stays the same? How can we grip tightly something that has no fixed shape? Even our own emotions, those storms inside, are not ours in the way we think. They rise and fall like waves in the ocean, conditioned by countless causes. Memories, hormones, someone else's passing glance. To believe we should be able to master them all is like believing we can stop the tide with our hands. The peace we seek is not found in domination, but in alignment. It's not forcing the wind to blow our way. It's turning our sail. And sometimes the most spiritual act we can take is not another effort to fix something, but a long, slow exhale. Have you tried that lately? Not the kind of breath we take when preparing to speak, but the kind we take when we finally stop trying to hold it all in. A breath that says, this moment is enough. A breath that doesn't rush to the next one. That's surrender in its softest form. A letting go without falling apart. A loosening that actually makes us stronger. Sometimes we mistake holding on for strength. But holding on is often the easier path because it's what we know. Because it feels like doing something. Because it makes us feel in control, even if we're only clinging to our own fear. Letting go, on the other hand, that takes courage. A different kind of strength, the kind that doesn't shout, but sits quietly in the silence of not knowing. Have you ever stood at the edge of a decision, knowing deep inside that something needed to be released? A job, a dream, a relationship, or maybe just a story you've told yourself for years. I am not enough. If I let go, I'll lose everything. This pain defines me. So many of us carry these stories like sacred relics, even when they no longer serve us. We repeat them until they feel like truth. But the Buddha gently reminds us, suffering is not our nature. It's a habit, and habits can be unlearned. There's a Zen story that speaks softly to this. Two monks were walking together through the countryside. They came to a river where a young woman stood, hesitant to cross. One monk, without hesitation, lifted her and carried her across the river. The other monk said nothing, but hours later he finally burst out, "You shouldn't have done that. You know we are not supposed to touch women." The first monk smiled and replied, "Brother, I left her at the river's edge. Why are you still carrying her? How many people, how many conversations, how many regrets are we still carrying?" Long after their time has passed, surrender asks us to set them down, not because they didn't matter, but because they don't need to weigh on us anymore. We think surrender means losing, but it actually means seeing. It means noticing that the more we grip, the more we ache. It means finally understanding that peace doesn't come from winning every battle, but from choosing which ones are even worth fighting. We try to control outcomes, reactions, timelines, people's opinions of us. And in doing so, we often lose touch with the one thing we can control, our own presence. What if we stopped trying to manipulate the world to match our expectations? What if, instead, we brought ourselves more fully into the now? The Buddha taught the power of mindfulness not as a buzzword, but as a sacred return. Practice of presence. A path back to the only moment that ever truly belongs to us. This one. And in that moment, if we listen carefully, we begin to hear the quiet truth that was always there. We are safe. Not because we've controlled everything, but because we've released the need to. Imagine this. You're standing in a forest. A gentle wind moves through the trees. Leaves fall, but none of them panic. They simply float, swirl, and land where they are meant to. There is no resistance, only rhythm. Life too has its seasons, and we are not meant to hold on to every branch forever. Surrender doesn't erase our agency. It refines it, teaches us to act where we can, and release what we can't. And in that balance between effort and ease, we begin to touch the heart of true freedom. Not a freedom we earned, but a freedom we remembered, one breath at a time. It's strange, isn't it? How so much of what we try to control is rooted in love. We plan because we care. We cling because we remember. We resist change because we once found safety in something or someone, and we don't want to lose it. The human heart is soft, and when it breaks, we sometimes mistake the cracks for weakness. But what if the cracks are openings? What if, through them, something deeper breathes? There's a quiet transformation that happens when we stop trying to protect ourselves from the natural rhythms of life. When we stop resisting loss, change, uncertainty. When we no longer brace against the rain but allow it to fall. One of the most powerful images in Buddhist thought is the lotus. It grows through mud, not around it, not in spite of it, through it. And that's what surrender is. Not bypassing pain, not pretending it doesn't matter, but rising through it with soft strength. There's a moment many practitioners reach in meditation. Not always dramatic, not always visible, but deeply felt. It's the moment they stop trying to meditate. They stop chasing stillness, stop scanning their breath for flaws. They just sit. And in that sitting, something opens. A vastness, presence, a realization that they don't have to do anything to be here. That stillness was never something they had to earn. It was always waiting. That moment, that gentle letting be, is surrender. And it's not limited to the cushion. It can happen in a conversation. When you choose to listen without defending. When you no longer need to be right. It can happen when looking at your child. When you stop trying to mold them into your hope and start seeing them as their own unfolding being. It can happen as you close a chapter of your life, career, a marriage, a version of yourself that served you once, but is ready to be laid down. The world may not celebrate those moments. There are no trophies for emotional courage, no spotlight when you finally stop fighting a battle inside yourself. But you will feel it, not in applause, but in your breath, your sleep, your smile. Surrender makes room for peace. Not the loud kind, not the Instagrammable kind. The kind you carry with you in the quiet spaces of the day. When the world is rushing and you are not. When someone criticizes and you don't collapse. When the future is unclear and you still trust your step. This isn't detachment. It's intimacy without fear. It's a spacious heart, a grounded mind, and hands no longer clenched, but open, ready to receive or release as needed. The Buddha never said life wouldn't challenge us. He said that by seeing clearly, we would suffer less. Surrender, then, is a kind of seeing, a clear gaze into the nature of things. They come, they go. We hold them gently while they're here, and bless them as they pass. And in this we become free, not because nothing touches us, but because we no longer need to hold everything so tightly. Some days we wake up feeling fragile, not because something dramatic has happened, but because we've been holding ourselves together for too long. Tight smiles, silent compromises, internal negotiations we didn't even know we were making. The subtle, this weight, but it adds up until one morning even the smallest thing can tip us. A dish breaks, plan falls through, someone forgets to call, and suddenly we're not just reacting to that moment, we're reacting to everything we've carried unspoken. This is the hidden cost of control. Keeps us busy on the outside, but disconnected on the inside. We become strangers to ourselves, managing, performing, editing, and the mirror, literal or internal, becomes harder to look into. Because what if we see tired eyes? What if we see grief we haven't named? What if we see the version of ourselves we've been avoiding? But here's the quiet gift the Buddha offered. Not a solution, but an invitation. See clearly, without judgment, because in seeing, without clinging or rejecting, we return to the center. There's an old story about a Zen master who kept a cracked mirror on his desk. Students once asked him why he didn't replace it. He smiled and said, "This one tells the truth. A perfect mirror shows us only what we wish to see. But a cracked mirror, one that has lived through time, reminds us that truth is not always polished. Sometimes it's raw, sometimes it's uncertain, but it's real. And in that realness, there's something sacred. Because to see ourselves honestly is to surrender the performance, to sit with our regrets, not to punish ourselves, but to bow to them, to hold our unmet expectations gently, like dried petals of a once bright flower, to whisper to the version of ourselves who tried so hard to control everything, 'Thank you. You don't have to carry it all anymore.' This is a turning point, not loud, not dramatic, just a moment of clarity so quiet, it feels like exhaling after holding your breath for years. And from that breath comes choice. You begin to notice when you're tensing up again, when you're about to say yes to avoid disappointment, when you're editing yourself to keep the peace. And instead of defaulting to the old pattern, you pause, you soften, you ask, is this really mine to hold? Can I be kind to myself here? What would happen if I didn't try to fix this right now? And just like that, the illusion starts to crack. Not your spirit, just the idea that you had to be everything for everyone all the time. The mirror doesn't lie, but it also doesn't accuse. It simply reflects. And when met with compassion, that reflection becomes healing. Surrender in this light is not defeat. It's the courage to be seen, to let your humanity show, to trust that even in the mess, there is worth, that you don't need to be perfect to be at peace. You just need to stop fighting yourself. And sometimes the gentlest way to begin is by sitting with your reflection and saying, I see you. You can rest now. It's one thing to understand impermanence in a story. It's another to live it on a Monday morning, to let your child leave the house without replaying every worst-case scenario, to receive a message that says, we need to talk, and not spiral into fear, to look in the mirror and greet the lines you didn't have a year ago with kindness instead of resistance. Living without clutching doesn't mean living without care. It means caring without gripping. It means allowing your partner to be who they are, not who your fear wants them to be. It means creating, not to prove your worth, but because it brings you closer to something still and sacred inside. It means letting the weather be what it is, letting the outcome be what it will, and letting yourself be here now fully. Start small. Maybe it's breathing before you react. Maybe it's noticing the moment your mind tries to predict, prepare, panic, And instead, you come back to this inhale, this exhale, this cup of tea that's warm just for now. One day you'll realize you've gone a full hour without overthinking, then a morning without dread, then maybe a week where your shoulders didn't live in your ears. That's how surrender works, not in thunder, but in soft, repetitive choices. To not resist what is, to say yes to life, not as you wish it were, but as it gently arrives at your door. And in this way, you begin to taste a freedom that isn't loud. It's quiet, like a room you've swept clean, like light spilling in through an open window. And this kind of freedom isn't about what you let go of. It's about what you no longer need to carry, because your peace no longer depends on the world staying the same. It only depends on your willingness to meet it with open hands. Maybe now, you're not trying so hard to hold it all together. Maybe something inside you quietly has exhaled. Surrender doesn't mean you've stopped caring. It means you've stopped carrying things that were never yours to hold. The river still flows, the seasons still shift, but you are no longer fighting the current. You're floating, breathing, learning that the softest path may be the strongest one after all. Because in a world that teaches us to grip, choosing to release is an act of courage. And the peace that comes is not loud. It doesn't need to be. It hums inside you like a bell that's been waiting to ring. So let me ask you gently, what have you been gripping that you might let go of today? What thread have you held too tightly that's ready to drift? Tell me in the comments, even just a few words. Sometimes sharing is how we begin to loosen the knot. And if this path speaks to you, if the quiet voice of Buddhist wisdom feels like home, then walk it with us. Subscribe to Lotus Light Teachings, not for more content, but for more moments like this. Moments where we stop gripping the world and start returning to ourselves. See you in the next episode. And until then, may your hands be open and your heart at ease.